Hey, this is Gretchen Menn, the guitar player for Zepparella, and welcome to the Zepparella Learning Channel. This is the second video of a three-part series on the Led Zeppelin song, Immigrant Song, and in it I'm going to be showing you how I approach an improvised solo. If you're just looking to learn how to play the riffs, like on the recorded version, go to the first video because that's where I cover it. Led Zeppelin's album version of this song doesn't have a solo, but Zepparella often will reference what Led Zeppelin did live as we determine how we want to tackle a song. And since Led Zeppelin did a solo live, I decided to do one as well, and I'll include the link to the main reference that I used as I approached this solo. This is an example of how Zepparella really tries to balance the letter and the spirit of Led Zeppelin. And because long, epic musical departures and improvisations were such a trademark of them, we felt that omitting it would be shunning a signature element of Led Zeppelin. So we decided to do an improvisation in this song. But rather than take you lick by lick through what is mostly an improvised solo, what I'm going to show you is the sources from which I drew and different ways you can approach the solo so that you can come up with your own improvisation. There's a lot you can do with this solo. Because the bass is hammering away at F sharp, you get to determine how you interpret that F sharp. That means that you have a lot of freedom, and sometimes a really great chord progression, while it can be slightly more confining, can also give you a lot of melodic direction to a solo. On the other hand, having this much freedom means that you can go all over the place in terms of different types of modes and different types of sounds as you determine how you want to interpret that F sharp. Always using Jimmy Page as the main reference, what I noticed in the solo that he did live, at least on the one that I linked below, is that he mixes more F-sharp pentatonic, minor pentatonic, with more modal sounds. So we'll be starting there and looking at what you can do with those. This lesson assumes a little bit of theoretical knowledge already, but you don't have to have it to be able to hang with it. I'll do my best to break things down for you. And if you have questions that you want answers to, I'll link to some free educational material if you wanted to do a little bit of theoretical brushing up. And I also have a link that I'll include that will have transcriptions of the different modes I use all across the neck, because we'll be going over them quickly, mostly in one position. First, let's talk about the structural elements upon which this solo is built. The solo we do in Zepparella does have a general framework within a lot of moments of spontaneity, and that's true for a lot of what we call improvisation. So unless you're talking about truly free jazz or certain types of performance art, most improvisation still has an underlying framework, chord changes, counts, cues, licks, and things to keep a band on the same page. This song is relentlessly in F sharp with only a few other chords that happen within it, and those are almost more as strikes or for very brief moments. So the way we decided to approach transitioning into a solo is to add some chord changes, which immediately signifies to the ear that something different is happening. On top of that, rather than continuing this pattern of very percussive, galloping notes, we move to long, held-out chords. So the bass and I hit the following chord changes, and we hold them for 2 measures each, so a count of 8. So we start with C sharp, and I'm actually hitting octaves, not a full chord, just the 2 notes, C sharp and C sharp, which is at the 9th position with my first finger on the C sharp of the E string, and then my 4th finger on the C sharp, an octave up, of the D string. It also kind of, those octaves refer back to the main riff too. So we have C sharp, so we hold that for a count of 8, and then we move down to A. Same thing, hold for a count of 8, G sharp, and then I'm going to call it an F, and if anybody who's geeky enough on theory to say that it should be called an E sharp, I know who you are, we'll call it an F. So again, then that repeats, so that's C sharp for a count of 8, A, G sharp, E sharp, or F, and then we transition to the next section. Part of what this does is it gives the drums a moment to be able to be showcased. And it's also a great moment of break for the ears. You've been hearing F sharp over and over and over again, and now you get some other tonalities, which to me creates a whole new section. So this is not something that I'm suggesting other people use, but it's more a way that we've approached it so that should you play the song and should you want to do an improvisation within it, consider adding something of your own device. Now is where I consider the beginning of the guitar solo. And what I do is I start playing around with these octaves. Again, the octaves are derived from that first riff, which is those are the octaves. And what I do is I go from this F, E sharp, note of tension that really wants to resolve so badly back to the tonic of F sharp. So after this drum moment where we're hanging on the F for 2 counts, I resolve it to F sharp, and then I go from there. And I decided to immediately begin with some of the modal sounds that Jimmy uses. So modal, if you don't know what that means, again, you can do some research, but suffice it to say, what I use is something called Phrygian dominant. So let me tell you how we build a Phrygian dominant scale and tonality. This is not a course in modes, but very quickly, just so I can define my terminology, a mode is specifically a pattern of half and whole steps that creates a particular musical sound. Major is a mode, minor is a mode, and you have other modes as well. This particular mode I'm talking about, which is Phrygian, and then from Phrygian, the Phrygian dominant, has a very characteristic sound, and it's the half step between the root, F sharp, and then the second scale degree. So rather than being a whole step, which is what you have in major and minor, meaning F sharp to G sharp, you have F sharp to G, and that immediately sounds to our Western ears rather exotic. First, a Phrygian scale in F sharp. Start at the 2nd fret of your E string, and we're going to play F sharp with your 1st finger on the 2nd fret, G natural with your 2nd finger on the 3rd fret, A with your 4th finger on the 5th fret, and now you're going to move to the A string, and you have B on the 2nd fret, C sharp on your the 4th fret of the A string, D with your pinky on the A string of the 5th fret, and then E, which is on the 2nd fret of the D string, and then F sharp. You may notice that the only note that is different from your typical minor mode or your natural minor is the 2nd scale degree. So if you take an F sharp minor scale, you have F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp. The only note that is different is that instead of that G sharp, you have a G. So Phrygian, again. And if you really want it to sound Phrygian, you have to lay into that half step between the 1st and 2nd scale degree. So emphasize that G, but resolve it. Now to make it a Phrygian dominant, you're going to go 1 step further, and you're going to raise the 3rd scale degree. So instead of A, you're going to be playing A sharp, and that will give you an even more exotic sound. F sharp, G, A sharp. So now you're at the 6th fret with your pinky, and it's a little bit of a stretch, but just make sure your thumb is in a good position on the back of the neck. You don't want to be collapsing this way or this way. Try to have your thumb, if you can see that, more in this type of position. That'll give you better reach. So you have F sharp, G, A sharp, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp. And that's your Phrygian dominant. Part 3 of the solo, I go between different types of modes. I still continue to use the F sharp Phrygian and Phrygian dominant, but I also go to what Jimmy did, which is much more an F sharp minor pentatonic. So even though this is kind of backwards, but I'm doing it sequentially, now that you've gone through Phrygian and Phrygian dominant and F sharp minor, I'm just going to take you through an F sharp minor pentatonic, which you probably already know, but in case you don't, second fret starting on the F sharp, and then A with your pinky on the 5th fret of the E string, and then B with your first finger on the A string on the 2nd fret, C sharp with your 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the A string, E with your first finger on the D string 2nd fret, and F sharp with your 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the D string. And then that continues up also. I've been showing you these in 1 octave, so let's continue. So the way that goes is after you hit the F sharp with your 4th, on the 4th fret, with your 3rd finger on the D string, you just continue the same notes moving upwards. You have your A on the 2nd fret of the G string, B with your 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the G string, C sharp with your first fret, C sharp with your first finger on the B string of the 2nd fret, and then E with your pinky on the 5th fret of the B string, F sharp with your first finger on the 2nd fret of the E string, and then A with your 4th finger on the 5th fret of the E string. So F sharp minor pentatonic, the one that everybody knows and goes to, the shape at least. In practicing these, I would encourage you not just to play them up and down, but also play them up and across the neck, so in different positions. But if that's new for you, it's fine to just play them in one position and then start building upon the foundation that you already have and looking into new territory. It doesn't mean that you're going to be trying to come up with the world's most brilliant guitar lines, but get used to going between notes that aren't immediately adjacent and trying to find new ways to disorient yourself and reorient yourself and engage your ear. And if you hear something that you're like, oh, that's really cool, spend a little bit of time with it. In my improvisation, I will generally go between any of these modes: F sharp, minor, pentatonic, F sharp, Phrygian, F sharp, Phrygian dominant, and sometimes just F sharp minor. I try to mix them up and be ready to go between whatever my ear and my creativity at the moment wants to do. So practice the scales, practice the modes, and practice going between them. It doesn't happen in 1 hour unless you're an experienced improviser. So take the time you need and keep an open and exploratory mindset. Now we get to a place that I actually have as a specific musical moment, and I do it for a couple of reasons. One is it lets my band know that I'm at a certain place within the solo, which is roughly the halfway part. And it also takes me from one register to the next. Here's where I use what is called an octatonic scale. And that is a cool sounding name for basically just a pattern of half and whole steps. It's just alternating half steps and whole steps. Even though I didn't take this specifically from Jimmy Page, I felt that so much of what he's doing is this interplay with tension and resolve and half steps and modal sounds. I felt that it was still within the context. So what I do, and this is a cue, I'm not saying you should learn the specific lick, but I'm going to show it to you so that you can determine if something like this could be useful to you in your improvisations and to cueing your band that you're within a certain place in your solo. And we start on the 2nd fret of the E string, F sharp to G, and then A with your 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the E string, and then A sharp with your pinky. And then that pattern continues. So now we move it to the A string starting on the C, and then the D string starting on F sharp again, and then the G string starting on C. And now, because remember that the G and the B strings are tuned as a 3rd, not a 4th, you need to go up 1 extra fret to be at the F sharp on the 7th fret of the B string, right? And then the C. And then I slide up to the F sharp at the 14th fret of the E string with my pinky, and then A sharp at the 16th fret, at the 18th fret, and then F sharp again with your first finger. So the reason the octatonic works so well to my ears, well, one, you can really play anything over that F sharp as long as you're hitting the F sharp. But you have between F sharp and G that half step that really refers to the Phrygian mode, and then between A and A sharp, you're kind of going between both the minor and the Phrygian sound that has the A as a characteristic note, and then the Phrygian dominant that has that A sharp as a characteristic note. So you're basically referring to all of these modes with one line up the neck. Now that everybody's asleep, part 5 of the improvisation, I'm now up in a higher register, right around the 14th position. It's where the octatonic climb has taken me from more the lower and the mid register, and now I'm up in the higher register. And I go between usually an F sharp minor pentatonic sound and the F sharp Phrygian dominant. And right in here is about when I'll hit the melodic peak of the solo, like the highest note, the most intense part. And having that moment in mind helps keep me oriented, and at least on a good night, or at least the goal is I can give more the sense that the solo went somewhere or said something. Now, the very end of this solo, I play something that is specific, so it is not improvisation. And I decided to play chords for a couple of reasons. Is one, we have now been playing sometimes a couple minutes of single note lines, and playing chords helps make it very, very clear that I am ending the solo. Stages you don't always have the best sound. Sometimes you don't hear exactly what's going on if your monitor isn't exactly right, and ears get fatigued. So if I play chords, I know the rest of the band is going to catch the cues. The first chord is an F sharp minor with a C sharp in the bass. So the way that I'm fingering that is with my third finger on the C sharp of the D string of the 11th fret, and then the F sharp on the G string at the 11th fret, and then the A on the B string at the 10th fret with my second finger, and then the C sharp on the E string at the 9th fret. So that's my first chord. And then my second chord, my first finger, I move just up a half step to the D, which you could see that is a D major 7. But because of the way the F sharp is hammering away in the bass, and because these two lower notes are staying in common for now, I hear it less as a real change of harmony and more just a different color note on top of that F sharp minor. So that's your first chord, second chord, and then this, your second finger moves down to the G sharp of the B string at the 9th fret, and your first finger to the B of the A string, the B of the E string at the 7th fret. The third chord, you're going to move your second finger down to the G sharp of the B string, which is the 9th fret, and your first finger to the B of the E string at the 7th fret, still with the C sharp and the F sharp and the lower string. So that's your that's your third chord. And then back to the F sharp minor. And then that cycle, something similar to it repeats with F sharp minor, slide your first finger up to D, and then your third chord, and then this fourth chord is you're going to move finally your third and fourth fingers down from F sharp on the G string, C on the D string to a half step down. And now the last chord. That's just a C dominant 7 with your first finger barring at the 9th fret. So your first finger barring across the D string and the higher string. So you've got a B here. You've got an E sharp, or an F if you want to call it that, but technically it would be an E sharp for my fellow theory geeks, a G sharp, and a C sharp. So very slowly. Another thing I'll do to really emphasize that cue, that way if anybody's struggling with their monitor, they're definitely going to hear it, is I will combine a visual cue with an auditory cue. So not just an auditory or musical cue playing the chords, I'll also kick on the wah-wah pedal, which creates a very obvious sound, and I'll raise my guitar up, and that ensures that we are back to the riff all together. You can go so deep with improvisation. Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin certainly did, and that is such a wonderful and fun and interesting part of their music, and what makes it so interesting to play. I know I'm always working to improve as an improviser, and it could be a lifelong process. You could truly spend your life just focused on that one aspect of music and still uncover new and exciting and challenging things in it. So have fun with it and keep a growth mindset, because The only way to get better at anything is through hard work and through perseverance, through frustrations. Frustration is something I often combat within myself, and having to push through it is making me a better person. So be okay with the uncertainty of it. You have to learn to be okay with sometimes humiliating yourself, which I have done plenty of on nights where the improvisation totally didn't happen the way I wanted it to. That's how we improve. So stick with it, have fun, find a great F-sharp groove, get a drummer to back you up, get a bass player to lay down that F-sharp, and go crazy with it. Have fun. See you in the next video.